Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Omar Badar, and you're in the stream.
Today, how has the U.S. election been covered by media outlets in your part of the world? Too much, too little, or perhaps too sensational?
Now we have a roundtable of international journalists to discuss the politics and the personalities that their audiences react to the most.
So Omar's got his finger on the pulse of what you all are saying at home, and what are people talking about?
We're actually getting a lot of people who are weighing in about the U.S. election from all around the world. So we have Elizabeth over here who says Trump often gets disproportionate visibility in EU media and various EU member state media. And then we have Ivan over here on Facebook who says, here in Spain, Hillary seems not to have a whole representation of herself without remembering her husband, Bill Clinton. Always the news shows only a part and not the whole thing because it would be impossible to understand. For those of you at home, you want to know what you think about the U.S. election, no matter where you are in the world, weigh in by tweeting us using the hashtag you see at the bottom of the screen, AJStream.
Hi, I'm Mike Michella, and I'm a political strategist, and I'm in the stream.
As the race to the White House approaches its final lap, the field of candidates has seemingly narrowed to just two: Republican business tycoon Donald Trump and Democratic former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Their visions of economic, social, and foreign policy differ greatly, and international reaction to those have varied as well. World press has covered each of them extensively, lampooning, applauding, and even scolding the candidates at different times. So with us to discuss how it's all been received, on set, Stefan Groby is the Washington correspondent for Euronews. Ruben Barrera is a correspondent for Notimex, a Mexican wire service. Agata Popenda is a Polish journalist for two Polish magazines, Political Critique and Polityka. Usually based in Washington, D.C., she joins us from Poznan, Poland. And in New York, Namrata Brar is bureau chief in the U.S. for the Indian news channel New Delhi Television. Thank you all for being here. Namrata, I'll start with you. I know that you covered the tail end of the last election. How has that been different from this coverage and what you've had to do this time around?
Malika, thanks for having me on. I think it's been radically different. If I have to go to Barack Obama and Mitt Romney's final face-off in the last elections, that election was one of hope from both candidates, promising a better reality. This election is all about fear, which is a completely different rhetoric, and I think that has stunned the Indian audience as well. The social media used by Donald Trump in his campaign, the wild rhetoric, which is alienating a vast majority of minorities, has stunned them. But also what has stunned them is that it's not Donald Trump alone who is propagating it. It is a huge following in America, which are multiple Donald Trumps, his supporters, his fan base, which have made him the Republican presidential candidate.
So, Stefan, hope versus fear. I know you also covered that past election,
yes.
and you're a historian of American politics, and so you know this. What was the difference like for you?
I agree with this assessment, and from a European perspective, this is about the only country in the world that we cover that closely, even more closely than other European countries. Germany, where I come from, of course, we cover the French elections and the British elections, but to a lesser extent. But America is America, and everybody is focused on it. Now, in Europe, everybody was getting ready for a show between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush about a year ago, a year and a half ago, right? And then came Donald Trump. And this was widely regarded as an entertainment stunt, right? A joke. And now Europeans are getting used to the idea that he might end up becoming the next commander-in-chief. And this has generated some very scary thoughts, especially on social media, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a completely different show compared to what we were seeing 4 years ago.
Yeah, and we actually have that reflected in our online community as well, the extent to which Trump has dominated this coverage. So we have Arman over here who says, here in the UK, it's been fairly balanced. Trump gets more coverage when he says stupid things, but it's not very in-depth. We have Deepak here who says, India's English language media covers Donald Trump's shenanigans in some detail. And George says, New Zealand new media seems to focus on Trump more than anything else, comedic angles followed by utter disbelief. Ruben, I'll toss this to you. what is your sense? Has Trump pretty much stolen the show of this election? Is it possible to get? Is the election coverage really different because of Trump this time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have to take into account something, and that is the fact that of these two candidates, I mean, Hillary Clinton is a well-known political persona in Mexico. You know, former First Lady, former senator from New York, former Secretary of State, and on the other hand, you have a guy who is new in this arena. And I mean, he was not a little bit because of the TV show that he used to have. But the fact that we have a guy saying all this, you know, this incendiary rhetoric, and especially in Mexico, I mean, there has been a lot of attention because of the things that he had been saying. I think that's playing the fact that all the attention it's on Trump. And you have to remember the last election, you know. I think that he didn't last, I will say, maybe 2 months in the internal process before quitting. And a lot of people were expecting the same thing this time, and voila, you know. Now we have a situation where, I mean, we don't know what to expect on November, really.
We don't know what to expect. I can see you nodding there. I want to show our audience something you wrote not too long ago. This is Hillary versus Donald. You'll have to translate the rest of it for us. Tell us about the assignment process behind this piece and what your editors tell you they're looking for.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say that I had a luxury to cover Bernie Sanders' campaign very closely, since my magazine is very left-wing oriented. However, of course, right now, the game is over, and we are switching to Trump and Hillary. And I think both candidates are equally controversial for Polish people here, especially that recently Bill Clinton said something that really made Polish people upset. Mm-hmm. He said that Hungary and Poland are not doing a good job preserving the democracy that the US gave them pretty much after World War II and after the end of communism. So right now, when I read Polish media, I think they treat both candidates as really controversial, and they laugh at both of them. So,
and then this article?
And this article is simply Trump versus Hillary, what's gonna happen next? And that's a pure speculation from probably a month ago. Pretty much stating that it seems that these will be the people participating in this context from now on.
Mm. You know, Stefan, she said pure speculation from a month ago. I want to show our audience a clip where you admit that some of what you're saying is speculation, but it's also a whole lot of explaining. So this is you presenting for Euronews, and it's on Super Tuesday, of course, that big day where there's a lot of primaries and voting that's happening to kind of decide and narrow down this candidacy. Have a look at this.
What everybody is thinking here is that we are drifting toward a brokered convention, which means that Donald Trump will have the plurality of the delegates before the convention in Cleveland, Ohio, but not the majority. So that leaves us with a whole variety of possibilities, even of a possibility of a candidate who is not yet known. Today, the name of Paul Ryan was floated, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. For the first time, he did not particularly exclude the possibility of his running against Trump, but these are pure speculations. My guess is that Donald Trump will eventually be the Republican nominee.
So part of your job is explaining all of that.
Well, I was right.
and you were. He was right.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast you know, things can change. Nobody's talking about a brokered convention anymore, although apparently the anti-Trump, the dump Trump forces are still not totally dead. But I would think that for the same reasons that were valid on that evening of the Florida primary, these efforts are doomed because they are lacking a credible candidate. And this has been the fact since the whole process started last year. If 16 highly respectable, competent, professional politicians from all walks of Republican life cannot beat Trump.
As you say that, you could see the smile, the smirk there.
Well, because I wouldn't say that all of those candidates were highly respected, you know.
Well, at least respected in the Republican world, and most of them were former sitting senators and governors.
Because remember what happened with Ted Cruz. I mean,
what happened with Ted Cruz?
Well, I mean, the guy was detested by their own party and by their own college in the Senate. So, I mean, I think that, I mean, for me, this is one of the, I have been covering 5 presidential elections, and this is the election that broke all the convention. I mean, we were making some assumption at the beginning. You were right when you said Jeb Bush will be the, I mean, a lot of people would say he will be the nominee. And now we have a scenario that, I mean, if you tell someone 10 months ago or 11 months ago that Donald Trump, you know, this flamboyant billionaire will be the candidate for the president of the United States by the Republican Party, I don't know if any people will take you seriously.
No, I agree. I didn't say that.
I get a question across to Stefan as well as Aga, if I can.
Go ahead.
You know, the polls in Brexit were so wrong. And now that we hear that England is out of the European Union, many other countries are expecting to follow the same kind of path. At least the noise around that is growing louder and louder with right-wing nationalists in France to Dutch to pretty much all across Europe. So to your mind, this phenomenon of a Donald Trump is not limited only to the United States, because it seems to be happening all across Western democracies, the civilized democracies across the world.
Yes, I don't think that polls made this connection yet. I did not find anything like that in the media. However, of course, it's obvious that that Brexit is pretty much what some version of Trumpism in the U.S.
But I disagree on that sense, because, for example, what we're seeing in Latin America is the opposite of what we're seeing in this country with the rise of populism and what happened last week in the United Kingdom. I mean, taking account what happened in Argentina, where, you know, they have a populist government for the last 12 years. Now they have a different government, more leaning towards the right. And then you see what happened in Venezuela, where a populist government who held a strong hand for the last, I don't know, more than a decade, they lost the control of the Congress. And you see what happened in Bolivia, where a populist president lost the referendum seeking another 10. So it's interesting for me to see how, you know, we see this rise of populism in advancing economies, in advancing countries, and we're seeing some sort of, you know, change in less developing countries.
I do want to back up to one point that Namrata had mentioned a little bit earlier about Brexit and what it means for the U.S. election. You know, conventional wisdom, we've heard a lot of people say Brexit is a sign that Trump really has a chance and we have to take this seriously. We have Nash in our online community who disagrees, and Stefan, I want your thoughts on what Nash says. Says, I don't think there will be a huge impact, at least in terms of the framing. The focus will now be on Trump's alleged self-obsessed support for the economic fallout we're facing in Britain and how that support will damage his economic credentials, essentially saying that it will be moving in the other direction, undermining Trump. What is your take on this?
I don't think that Brexit has a strong impact on the election campaign. We're hearing all these opinions that, you know, America is drifting towards Trump as England was drifting out. Britain was always 1 foot in, 1 foot out in the European Union since they joined the club back in the 1970s. Let's not forget that America's rules are totally different. We have a totally different electoral system with an indirect system. We add up the results of the 50 states, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the essentials, Trump is behind. He is way behind. He is, the electoral map is stacked against him. The ground game of the campaign is stacked against him. He doesn't have the financial means. Look at the early pre-convention polling. This was the time in June, July, when Barack Obama 4 years ago surged into the lead in the polls, a lead that he would never give up until November. And I'm seeing a similar pattern here right now with Hillary Clinton building up a strong lead in the polls. And this is when Americans form their opinions.
But Stefan, on that note, if I can just interrupt, a year back, Donald Trump had the support of 3% Republicans within his voter base. And that has obviously changed radically in the course of this campaign. Also, Brexit was being polled. Even a Ladbrokes booking website was giving 86% odds to the Remain camp. And then just 1 hour before the final outcome, they changed it to 70% will vote Leave. So the premise I'm making is that the polling is wrong, that it doesn't seem to favor the right-wing populist vote. It seems to favor the liberal vote. And that is a worrying trend that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic
you actually raised something I want to pick up on. You raised something about polling and this voter base and whether or not polls accurately represent the voter. So you spoke to some voters, and I want to share this with our audience. This is a piece you did not too long ago on why some Indian Americans are supporting Donald Trump. Have a look.
Dr. Parekh, many say that he's alienated a lot of minorities. You know, again, remarks against Mexicans we've seen, and Mr. Ahuja referred to some of those, against African Americans and even Indians now with H-1B visas. He's made remarks that he will abolish those because they are taking jobs from qualified Americans. Yet, you have decided to support Donald Trump. So explain me your reason.
Well, I personally believe that he is a very strong candidate out of the candidates who are contesting. Number two, he's a doer.
He's a doer. So what are the differences between your viewers and your audience in the diaspora here in the U.S. and those who are actually back in India?
So that's interesting, Malika. This is an Indian Americans for Trump PAC. They don't raise money for him because Donald Trump obviously has made it clear that he has plenty, but they are endorsing him. They don't have an exact number in terms of people within the group, but making the case that Donald Trump is pro-business, will be great for India, will be great for the country. Back in India, the numbers are different. So we have some fringe groups like the Hindu Sena, for instance, which has about 25,000 people who actually celebrated Donald Trump's birthday just a month back. They did a puja, religious ceremony with his picture and so forth. But that is a very limited mindset. I think at the outset, the larger Indian policy towards America is that Hillary Clinton is a known commodity. She'll be seen as a continuation of Barack Obama. Donald Trump is a loose cannon whose foreign policy nobody knows, not even him. So it's very hard to predict that. And in fact, India's chief economic advisor made that same statement that he could be anti-immigration, which would hurt Indian jobs.
Yeah, we're hearing from a lot of people actually about the election as well. And we have Camelia here in our online community who's from Iran saying, Iranians are mostly liberal and many prefer the Democrats, but most of the Middle East are conservatives and are pro-Republican. I'm not entirely sure how many people would actually agree with that, but it does bring up an interesting point, which this election seems to have turned this whole right versus left, conservative liberal thing a little bit over its head. Because, Aga, I know that at least in Poland, you know, Hillary Clinton is viewed as more hawkish in some ways and therefore preferred by the right over there. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Not even by the right. I think that we just know that Donald Trump is potentially dangerous for NATO and all the plans that Poland has with NATO bases, with all the multinational battalions that we plan to have in Poland. So overall, Trump is unpredictable about NATO, and that's scary for, I think, all the Polish politicians, not even the right wing that is currently running the country.
And just the reference that we're making here about NATO are remarks that both candidates have made. So this is Donald Trump, you can see it on my screen here, has called NATO obsolete, criticized it heavily. Hillary Clinton, of course, has pushed back. She says, we will stand by our allies. And she says it would be like Christmas in the Kremlin if Donald Trump got his way over NATO. Ruben and Stefan, you hear these comments, and of course we've been talking about Trump a lot because, as you mentioned, he's the one that seems to grab these headlines. But in your own countries, for those audiences, how is Hillary Clinton perceived?
Well, as we've heard before, she is a known quantity, and she's quite popular in Europe, at least in Western Europe. I don't know the numbers from Poland, but in Western Europe, she's very popular, not only among other Western European governments or the political class in those countries, but also among the public. American politicians are usually, unless they commit huge mistakes, quite popular, and many people remember the first Clinton presidency under Bill Clinton and America's commitment to ending the war in the Balkans. So these are all positive things. Europeans are, of course, less knowledgeable about domestic issues here, all the nitty-gritty that we've heard about in the campaign. But overall, Hillary Clinton is largely favored in Western Europe.
Yeah, I think that's the case in Mexico. In Mexico, there is something similar with what happened among the Hispanic community in the United States, which is tend to see more favorably the Democratic Party and the Democrat candidates. And obviously, in the case of Hillary Clinton, as I said before, I mean, she's a well-known figure because of his past political life. Obviously, her association with President Bill Clinton. And now that we have these two choices, the funny thing is, as we were saying at the beginning, is that at least the media is paying more attention to Donald Trump than to Hillary Clinton. And I think
but you are the media, so yes, are you admitting that you...
But the thing is, I think that in some way, our editors in Mexico, as well as our readers, they think that they know pretty much a lot about Hillary Clinton.
Everything there is to know.
Yeah, basically. So it's like, I don't need to know a little bit more about her. I need to know more about this guy who I don't know. I mean, I saw his face in the TV before, but this is the first time that I see it in a different capacity. And the fact that this has this rhetoric against Mexican, where you will say, well, it was something isolated, and that's not the case, because every opportunity that he has, he doubled down that. We had the recent controversy regarding this Mexican-American judge, Gonzalo Curiel. So those type of things resonate not only here, but also in Mexico.
Oddly enough, there are people who see things a little bit differently. We have people tweeting in from India. Muhammad says, it's going, Secretary Hillary Clinton looked stern with Pakistan over the terrorist issue, but I expect Hillary to continue aid to Pakistan while Trump could possibly stop that aid. But then we have also Mr. Snell over here who says, the truth be told, they are both two sides of the same coin, and I see massive demise for the entire Middle Eastern countries. Namrata, I'm always flabbergasted when I come across people, many in the US, who have such intense dislike for Hillary Clinton that they see some sense of equivalence, that they look at them from a distance as the same thing. I'm curious, do you come across that a lot as well? Does it exist outside of the United States to the same extent that people see them as the same?
I think the problem, Omar, is Pakistan. For India, they look at Hillary Clinton as favoring Pakistan. Her close aide, Huma Abedin, is of Pakistani origin. The perception is that she will pander to Pakistani interests versus India's. So one is that. The second is a continuation of what John Kerry has been doing under the Obama administration, and many feel that he has a soft spot for Pakistan. So this entire dialogue of what the next Democratic president, Hillary Clinton, does in terms of changing the stance of America's policy vis-a-vis Pakistan is rankling a lot of people out there. But I have to say that India has the world's second largest Muslim population. There are 180 million Muslims in India, which is about 14% of the population, but it's also just second to Indonesia. And that is really important in the sense that Donald Trump has lashed out against Muslims, against immigrants, against any kind of minority groups. I think that binds us together in a certain sense, that this immigration rhetoric, this anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican, anti-anybody who's probably not white and American, is going to alienate foreign policies to a sharp extent.
I'm going to pause you there because I know that all of our guests have something to add to what you just said. We have to leave it there. We will pick it up in the post-show. Stream.aljazeera.com. You'll see you there. Welcome back. You're joining our Reporters Roundtable, examining the way the international media has covered the U.S. election. Because there are journalists in this roundtable, everyone's really busy. And just before we headed into the post show, Ruben was checking his phone. Hot news tip, maybe? What were you checking for?
No, I was checking some figures about the Mexican American population in this country, just to give you an idea of a measure about why, what Donald Trump. Every time that Donald Trump says something about Mexico, why there is this huge uproar or impact. We have 30 million Mexican American in this country. 6 million of those people are undocumented. And the thing is that now in these modern times, you can go to Mexico and ask anyone, and you're going to find someone who has either a brother, right, a sister,
here in the US.
The father, a friend who is in this country. So that's why, when Donald Trump said something about Mexico, not only resonate here, but also beyond the border. And the other thing is that this time, I think that this is the first time that I remember that a candidate, in this case Donald Trump, has a huge impact in the foreign policy in Mexico. Just last April, the Mexican government decided to change his ambassador in Washington because they feel that they need to have a more strong response to all these things.
Wow, so you're saying there's a direct correlation between a presidency, the potential Trump presidency.
Yeah, and this is something that we never see before. That gives you an idea about the impact of Donald Trump is provoking in the foreign policy of Mexico. The fact that you have to change an ambassador in the most important capital in the world, that tells you something,
So, Agatha, I'm wondering what comes next. Where do you go from here in your coverage?
We'll see what's going to happen. However, if I may, I would like to add one little thing to all this. We don't have a problem with the type of problem that you guys have in India or in Mexico with Trump, but because we're all white and Catholic. However, Trump still managed to really make Polish people nervous because he expressed his admiration for Putin, and whoever wants to have good relation with Poland has to be against Russia. So this is this disturbing thing for us. I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question.
No, but I liked what you said even more. You gave us a little bit more insight, I think, than we bargained for.
Actually, it's quite interesting looking at people who are doing kind of comparisons between how coverage is inside the United States and out. We have Rignam over here who says, coverage is not as exhaustive in Canada as it is in the US, thankfully. Trump as president will fundamentally change the dynamic with Canada. And then we have Blair here who says, our election coverage has a modicum of sanity attached to it, albeit rather boring. I'm grateful Arendt isn't as protracted, though, tweeting at us from Australia. Namrata, I kind of want to get your sense of how coverage is different. When you look at domestic US coverage, and how long it goes on, how different is it in other parts of the world?
I think, Omar, we are obsessed with our Indian news as well. So to be honest, there's a lot of preoccupation with local news. I think media is moving to that direction. Unfortunately, I would assume because you don't really understand what's going on in various parts of the world because you're so looking towards what's happening in your own house. But that being said, I think there's an unusual amount of coverage of United States across the world. And it's funny because we cover US so very extensively in India, but we don't have US understanding Indian interests even in 1/10 of that kind of fashion. So I'm sure popular media here doesn't understand what's going on in Indian politics.
Do you think the same is true for Europe and the audiences that watch Euro News?
Yeah, I think we're going to move into the realm of policy now. We're looking at the various policy proposals of the two candidates, although that sounds rather bizarre given the brashness and the violence between the two candidates. But we're also trying to educate people about how things work in America. We do this, of course, every 4 years, but things change over 4 years. Right. And I want to bring this up again because this is the most diverse electorate in the history of the United States. More than 30%, actually roughly 1/3 of Americans that will go to the polls or are eligible to vote are not white. And if a candidate who has negative ratings at around 88, 90% with 1/3 of the electorate, you can't get elected president in this country. And that's a major argument against Trump. How there are simply not enough uneducated white guys in this country that would put him over the top, to put it bluntly. And
I am quoting Stefani's bluntness right now.
So this is something we want to tell our audiences, educate how the system works, what is at stake, and what Americans really feel. Why are some of them toying with the idea of voting for Donald Trump? So there are a lot of stories out there that we can cover.
We do have an interesting question online that I would like to toss to both Ruben and Aga. We have Mikey over here who says, in the US, we aren't just voting for an American president, but a world leader. Why aren't we hearing more from the rest of the world in our press? Aga, I'll start with you. Do you think that basically a US audience would have something to learn from the way people outside the country are covering this election?
I'm not sure.
Yep.
Could they learn something
the
from
journalist.
how we cover?
A question she couldn't answer, but she's trying anyway. Go ahead, Aga.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe they could realize how exotic it is for us. And, well, I gotta say that to a certain extent, covering U.S. election is a certain spectacle in Poland. So even though it's a big show, it's not treated seriously. It's some sort of soap opera. That's why, like I said before, I think that both Trump and Clinton are equally scandalous figures. Yeah, so that would be it.
Well, in our case, I think that I was hearing what some of the things that Stefan was saying about the necessity of educate our readers in our countries about this political system. And that's true, because the last time that I was in Mexico, a lot of my friends and people who I encountered in the street were saying, I mean, could you tell me how a guy like Donald Trump was able to, be in the position where he's right now? Because they don't conceive that someone without any political connection, without any political career, could enter a presidential race and won the process. And in Mexico, for example, I mean, the only chance that you had to do something like that if you are a member of a political party. As an independent candidate, it's, well, now in 2018 we're going to have presidential election, and for the first time, I mean, we can have the possibility to have independent candidates. But that's something relatively new. But for a lot of readers and people in Mexico, it's difficult to understand. And I think that part of the obligation as a journalist is trying to explain in the best way possible how this system works, so people can understand, a little bit better about how the political system in this country works. It's not easy, because even when you tell this to people, some people say, well, I think that the guy is there because of his money. And it's a hard process sometimes, and I think it's a process that it won't be finished in this election. Maybe we will have to do the same in 4 more years,
Right. If I could just jump in on Robin's point, I just have to say that in India, the situation is completely opposite, that we have a current prime minister who was voted as a representational element of anti-establishment politics. We had the previous party, which is the Congress party, ruling for the last decade, and there was a sense of voter frustration with corruption scams and the feeling that nothing was being done on the reform agenda. And while Prime Minister Modi, Narendra Modi is very different from Donald Trump in the sense of his origins. He's the son of tea seller, and Donald Trump obviously is a billionaire. So while that contrast is sharp, this anti-establishment politics trend is something to note. And I have to say that our Prime Minister also has a Hindu nationalist agenda, which to be fair, is compensated by his reform move. So he comes on two platforms. Donald Trump, it seems to the Indian audience, comes on only one.
I like all the different angles that all of our guests have brought up today. I think Stefan said it best. There are so many stories to cover out of this, and there's only so much time before the actual election. So we'll see what to look forward to before November. I want to thank all of our guests because we're out of time. Agatha Popenda, Nomra Sabrar, Ruben Barrera, and Stefan Groby. Just enough time to get the last word from our community, Omar.
Sure. I'm actually going to leave us with a video comment that we got from Simon about why people in Ireland care about the US election. Check it out.
The US presidential election has been covered very closely by the media in Ireland. There's a lot of interest in Ireland in US affairs because of the number of people in Ireland who would have relatives in the United States, because of the close ties between Ireland and the United States due to years of immigration, but also because many US multinationals would employ tens of thousands of people in Ireland. For many companies there, Ireland is their European headquarters. So that really is what drives the interest, and certainly the media's interest, in covering this election.
Our thanks to Simon, our community member, for that comment. And of course, the conversation will continue online using #AJStream. We'll see you there.